I got to be honest with you guys. I don't miss doing this kind of work. And I used to live for it. I loved heavy engine work. In the vehicle, out of the vehicle, it didn't make any difference. This was like my zen place. For the last 15 or 16 years, all I've worked on is vintage Mopars and muscle cars, hot rods, fun stuff, you know, open, clean, accessible, everything nice and easy. Late model, you know, I don't know if it's just that I've gotten old or I've lost my will to do this sort of thing, but what used to take me like 3 hours to tear something like this apart is literally like taking me all day, and I've been like through the whole thing. But it's apart. This morning I knocked the head off of it, dropped the oil pan out, and I found the offending piston and popped that out of there. So I want to show you what I found, and I want to show you the autopsy process, because, you know, the thing is, you can find a problem inside the engine, but chances are that problem is not isolated, or in other words, like something caused it to happen. And you'd hate to go through all of this work, tearing an engine apart, replace an obviously broken part, and then have the problem repeat itself. So you always want to have an idea what happened, what caused this. A little bit of autopsy work goes a long way, and I'm confident that I found the problem. I'm going to show you how I arrived at that in a minute. But just to recap for you guys who aren't familiar with this, we picked up this Jeep about a little over 2 years ago on Facebook Marketplace, and I bought it needing a motor. So it was advertised as, you know, has a knock, needs a motor. So I went and I looked at it. It was clean. I started up, I put it in gear, and the knock didn't change. And generally, when it's a flywheel noise, it'll be different whether it's in gear or relaxed, you know, like in neutral or park. And it didn't make any change at all. And it had good oil pressure, so I knew that it wasn't, you know, a bottom end knock. I knew it was going to be a piston issue, because these 4.0s are known for piston issues. So I bought it, and I said, all right, well, you know, I'll just toss the motor in it, or rebuild this one, or whatever. So, you know, one thing leads to another. The truck ran great, didn't burn any oil, didn't do anything crazy. So I was like, fine, I'll just drive it to and from the shop until it lets go. Well, that turns into, like, now it becomes my daily driver, because I really do like this truck. And now it's my daily driver. And just a couple of trips back and forth, now it becomes like my daily. And for the last 2 years, I've put something like 70,000 miles on this thing, knocking the whole way. Duck, 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 duck. Like, you can hear this thing coming from 2 blocks away. But middle of September now, I've got the winter coming up. So I said, you know what, let's just get this out of the way now. Let's fix this thing and then move on. So that's what I did now this morning. I pulled it apart. And like I said, it never used any oil or did anything crazy. Didn't miss. And well, here's the cylinder head. So this is the back of the head. That's a 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. Here's our offending cylinder. And you can see it's got just a little bit of darkness here. But look at the plug, right? No sign of oil burning or anything like that. So it ran fine. You'd never know there was a problem except for that knocking. So the damage I found on this piston is identical to the damage that we found on that 4.0 we tore apart last year. And after going online and looking at other blown up 4.0s, I see the same damage over and over. It's always the same thing. It's always the skirt. And it's not always the same cylinder. It'll happen in all different cylinders. So here, I'll show you. This is the piston that we pulled out of here. And there's the damage. And here are 2 pieces of it that we fished out of the oil pan. There's still one little piece missing. It's in there someplace, but this is what happened. So it's obvious now. We have a broken piston. That's where our noise came from. But what caused it? Why did this skirt break? So now we need to really look at this thing and examine, like I said, just to make sure that we're finding the problem, you know, that we don't put this together and it comes apart in some other fashion. So looking at this thing, you know, I'm suspecting detonation. You know, it was the first thing that I thought of. Now, detonation shouldn't break a skirt, because detonation happens on the top of the piston, not the bottom of the piston. But the piston being upset or rattled, because detonation is like hitting the thing with a sledgehammer. When you hear an engine pinging, it's like literally, it's the same as you taking a hammer and just whacking on the top of the piston. And detonation can do very odd things. So looking at this thing, I'm looking for signs of obvious detonation, and I see them right away. So for openers, the oil rings Now again, this thing didn't burn any oil at all. And the oil ring moves, okay? It's not stuck in any way. It's completely free, see? And now here's the damaged part. So you would think that if there was going to be a problem with the oil ring, it would show up here. In fact, you would think if there was any problems with the rings, they would show up over here in this section. But now look at the second ring. So now the second ring is free, okay? To move it, okay? But now look where the second ring is stuck. I gotta go to the other side of the piston, and right there. The second ring is, the ringland is pinched exactly opposite the damage. Okay, so where the damage is, the ring is free, and across from there we have a pinched ringland. Now the top ring is stuck all the way around. It won't move at all. Now the damage, when the damage occurred to this piston to trap that ring, the ring was probably fully expanded and in contact with the cylinder wall. So when it crushed, when it pinched, it did it in such a position so that the ring was going to seal. Now, if it had happened when the ring was still, let's say, contracted before everything expanded, then the ring would be buried a little bit deeper into the piston and you'd have a compression problem. But we never had a compression problem with this thing. It hit perfectly on all 6 cylinders. But nevertheless, the top ring is pinched. So now that's a surefire sign of detonation, pinched ringlands. Now, interestingly enough, here's where our damage is. Exact opposite is where our pinched ringlands are. So what does that tell you? It means that the detonation hit on this side of the piston and drove the piston outwards like this and smashed the skirt into the cylinder wall, and that's what cracked it. And these skirts are extremely, this is a very lightweight piston. This is an extremely thin, very, very flimsy skirt. It doesn't take much to break this. So this thing evidently saw a detonation session. But now, can we be sure that that's what it is? Is there any other clue that we can go by to tell us, yes, this was definitely a detonation-induced issue? And we can. We have to look at the rod bearings. So here are the rod bearings from this cylinder. So this is the bottom shell. So here's what I'm trying to look at here. This is the bottom shell, and if you look at this witness mark, this is where the shell overhangs the cap, okay? So the shiny part is where it's in contact with the cap, and the dark part is what overhangs. And you can see that it's even. It's even from all the way across the back of the bearing on both sides. But now when we look at the top shell, and remember, this is the part that's in contact when the spark plug lights, when the pistons, when you're at top dead center combustion, this is the part that is coming in contact with the crankshaft, or this is the part that's between the rod and the crank. We see that here's that same witness mark, and you got it on the other side too, and then you get to right at this point, and the witness mark disappears. All right, same here. You see how the witness mark is even, and then it comes out there and it gets narrow. So that tells us that this bearing is pounded. Now this is a common thing to see like on a race motor. You run into detonation on a race motor, it'll pound the bearings. And in fact, like with fuel cars, it's one of the elements of a tune-up. You read how much the bearings are pounded. But you know, it's a normal occurrence to have the bearings pound. But on this, you shouldn't have that. So this tells, and also we can confirm it, that this bearing is pounded by measuring. So when we measured it, we found that there was a 2/1000 of an inch difference between this part of it and this part of it. And then we confirmed it with the bottom shell. So this bearing is pounded 0.02 of an inch out. You really shouldn't use a caliper or even a micrometer or a regular micrometer. When you're doing these, you're supposed to use a ball mic. And a ball mic will you'll be able to get a measurement inside the radius here. So all of these bearings are copper colored on this engine. It's just got a lot of mileage. So I'll be throwing a fresh set of bearings and a fresh oil pump in there. But this section of this pounded bearing combined with the pinched ring lands on the piston tells us that that's what caused this. This was a detonation issue. So now what could have caused the detonation? I mean, it could have been anything. The engine could have been run hot. It could have had a water leak and I ran it to where it was just knocking like crazy, or almost anything could have caused it. But the broken skirt is a result of detonation. When you're doing this kind of work, you really got to be a detective. You've really got to look this stuff over and try to figure out the causes. You know, what happened. Now, if this was a race engine, for this thing, it's fine. It'll be fine. But if this was a race engine and you find a pounded bearing like that, you always want to start looking at the crankshaft now, because if it pounded the bearing, there's a possibility that it'll crack the crank, and it'll crack the crank on the inside radius of the journal and the cheek of the crank. That's where you would find a crack that would correspond with a bearing that was pounded. But on something like this, no, not a chance of the crank being damaged enough for me to worry about it, especially since I've driven it for like 70,000 miles like this, and it shows no signs of anything. So the cylinder walls look beautiful. Cylinder walls look really nice. There's no damage or anything like that. Because remember, the piston it's a soft aluminum, and it's not gonna do really any damage to the cylinder wall. A quick hone, and that'll be good to go. The other cylinders, I still see crosshatch on a lot of the other cylinders. And look at how this thing rotates. Look at this. I'm not gonna put any tools or anything. This is just my hand, right, on the damper. Look how easy this thing rotates. People pay a lot of money for a low friction motor like that. So fresh rings on that cylinder, hone it. Fresh rings with fresh bearings all the way through it. Obviously, new gaskets, oil pump, and we're going to send it back down the road. I bet you this thing goes another 100,000 miles without me ever having to pop a valve cover. So that's it. Simple engine autopsy. You know, always look. Always try to figure out what happened. You got to be a mechanic, and you got to be a detective. You know. All right, I hope you got something out of that. I'll see you tomorrow.